Welcome back to Aunt Janet's Kitchen. Today we're going to do a step-by-step video on how to make a delicious pound cake. I think baking is one of the most gratifying tasks in the kitchen. There's just something so pleasant about putting that batter together, popping it in the oven, and at the end taking out a beautiful pie or a beautiful cake. I baked early in my life. I started baking when I was a young child, I guess maybe in 7th grade. I would bake cakes and sell them for $2. And I enjoyed it until my mom decided it was really costing her more for me to bake the cakes than I was making on the $2. So it's a lot of fun. And I think one of the things that makes it the most fun is the finished product is so well received. And you cannot compare store-bought baked goods with homemade. No matter how good the bakery, there is just something lacking, and maybe it's that extra ingredient of love. At any rate, oh, my husband rolled his eyes. There's something about home baking that makes it better. Let's get started. Someone who is new to baking, a pound cake is a great, easy recipe, and this one is really the best that I've ever tasted. It's from my Aunt Jeanette Corey, and the first time I tasted it, it was, wow, this is such a tender, moist cake. And she shared the recipe with me, and I followed it to a T, thinking all along, gee, I could use a little vanilla, but she doesn't say to use it, so I never did. And finally I asked her, why wouldn't you put vanilla in the cake? She said, oh, you do. So she left that part out. So this is her recipe, and I know if you're a first-time baker, this is a sure win. So let's take a look at the recipe, and then I'll begin prepping the pan that we use. The recipe calls to be baked in a tube pan, and I prefer a two-piece tube pan. It's easier to get the cake out, obviously, and it allows it to cool more evenly. Alright, however, I have had problems using the two-part tube pan in the past where I've used it with a cake recipe that oozed out, made a mess in the oven, and it affected the rise on the cake. And so to rectify that, I've begun to line the bottom of the tube pan with a piece of parchment paper. And I know this technique's unfolding it and cutting it, but I just simply take the bottom of the pan, the bottom of the insert, set it on the piece of parchment paper, take a little pencil, I don't know if it's working, a little pencil, and lightly mark the circle. Cut that out and set it in the bottom of the pan. Works like a charm. This is the recipe out of my little recipe book, and it will be posted online, but to get an overview of what we're going to be doing, let's take a look at it. Very simple recipe. 3 cups of cake flour, 3 cups of sugar, a pinch of salt, a half a pound of butter, 6 eggs, and a half pint of heavy cream. We are going to do the basic creaming of the sugar and the butter. We're adding the eggs one at a time, and crucial to this is to beat those eggs for 1 full minute between adding the next egg. We're then going to put in the flour and the milk, alternating those ingredients as we add them. And a trick to this recipe that I don't have a single other cake recipe that starts with a cold oven. Usually an oven is preheated. That's crucial in your recipe. In this case, you're starting with a cold oven and you're baking at a lower temperature, 325. And it bakes for an hour and a half. So there's an overview of the recipe. Let's get started on a perfect little circle, and I want to make sure I put the graphite side down into the bottom of the pan so that it doesn't season the cake. We don't want this cake seasoned with that little bit of pencil. And I set my insert in nice and snug. I'm going to then coat it with the baking spray. I wait though just prior to putting the batter in, because I think if you coat it too soon it just kind of runs. It doesn't seem like it sets as nicely. If I'm out of this, I simply use a little bit of Crisco and a little bit of flour to ensure that the cake doesn't stick. So we'll set this aside. Baking spray with flour. It's like Pam with flour in it. There's a couple different brands. I picked up this one this week. Either one is suitable. So it does make it easier to prepare a pan for baking. Okay. I use a stand mixer for this cake. I do think it would be too much of a job for your typical hand mixer, so I do use the stand mixer for the cake. And the first step is to cream the butter and the sugar. So let's get that in there. I'm using the paddle rather than the whip because I don't want to put a lot of air into the process with the creaming. So we're just going to, well, the creaming does put air into it, but I don't want to use the whip attachment. All right, there's our half a pound of butter. Now we're going to add 3 cups of sugar. To measure the dry goods, I like to use these measuring cups. All right, to measure the measuring cup designed to measure dry goods, powder, flour, sugar. And it's nice because I don't even really need to level it off with a knife. I can just kind of shake it off and it's a level cup. All right, so you put the sugar and the butter together. I start on a low speed because I don't want to spray everything around and out of the bowl. And as the sugar starts to get incorporated into the butter, I pick up the speed because creaming is usually done at a medium-high speed. So we're going to let this go for a while and we'll take a look at it with a close-up view so you can see what the final cream, butter, and sugar needs to look like. Oh, looks like I'm ready to speed it up. Okay, let's check. Okay, it's almost there. It still has a bit of a grainy feel to it. And when the creaming is more complete, it's less grainy. So we're going to pick up the speed. Okay, let's take another look. You can see it's pretty fluffy, so that's what we're looking for. Now it's time to begin the next step in the recipe, which is to add eggs one at a time, beating 1 minute between each egg. I use the jumbo eggs in cake recipes. That's a tip from my mom. Whenever she's baking a cake, she always wants the jumbo eggs. I used to use the large eggs, but I find you just get a nicer cake with the jumbo eggs. Alright, so the recommended technique is to break the egg into a bowl to make sure there's no eggshell going into the batter. So I tap it on the counter, separate it like so, and voila. Okay, I'll add the egg this way, one at a time. I am going to put a timer on because I find I tend to underestimate just how long a minute is, and the beating of the egg is crucial in this recipe because there are no leavening agents. There's no baking soda, there's no baking powder. The leavening action comes from the egg and from beating the air in. So we'll get started. I start off slow and then pick it up. Get my timer going and let it go for a minute. At the end of the minute, I'm going to use my spatula. 1 minute's up, and as you can see, the batter kind of creeps up the side of the bowl. So before I add the next egg, I use my spatula and I clean it back down into the bowl. Alright, just like that. And then I anchor the bowl again. You don't want to make the mistake of getting that beater going without the bowl anchored. It just makes a mess. Okay, so now we'll add our next egg and we will beat for another minute, and we'll do that 6 times. Make sure, before you cream the butter, that it's at room temperature, that it's softened. That allows the creaming process to happen more smoothly. And then make sure your eggs are at room temperature as well. That helps the process of incorporating the eggs in with the butter and sugar. So get them both out and get them at room temperature before you start. Well, I'm still adding eggs here. And oh, I just cracked this egg and had a piece of shell in it. So I was glad I was using the bowl. I just slipped the shell out with my finger and we're good to go. Whereas if you break the eggs right into the batter, you may not even notice a piece of shell has gone into the cake. And believe me, it's very unpleasant to bite into a piece of eggshell when you're eating a piece of cake. So here I go. I still have a couple more eggs to get done. Here's my timer. Look at how creamy this batter is getting now. I'm still working down the batter from the sides of the bowl in between each of the eggs. And the difference in the composition of the batter is now really obvious. It's very loose and smooth because of the liquid coming in from the egg. All right, and the color is lightening up, and that's probably from all the air that I'm beating in. So here goes egg number 5. We're still beating eggs. Incorporated into the butter and sugar, and now we're going to add the cake flour. There are basically 2 major brands of cake flour. I use them interchangeably. What's ever available in the market that I'm shopping is the brand that I buy, and if they're both there, I look for the one that's cheaper. They seem very comparable to each other. It is important when a recipe calls for cake flour that you do use cake flour. It allows for a more tender consistency of the cake, and I have made cakes with, you know, just regular flour that has called for cake flour, and I can tell you they're really better when you have the cake flour on hand. So we're going to measure that with our dry cup measure into a bowl, and making sure that we have a level cup measure. And we need 3 cups, and we're measuring them separately into a bowl because it's easier to handle putting it into the batter, because we're going to alternate the flour with the cream. All right? So it's nice to have it all measured out to do that. Now, the cream. Heavy cream. You might have noticed if you had an eagle eye at the beginning when I was showing my ingredients on the cupboard, I had my half and half out. So that was a mistake I caught, and hopefully, you know, you don't make mistakes like that. The heavy cream is usually sold in the pint containers, and my aunt wrote the recipe out as a half pint of heavy cream. Well, a half pint of heavy cream is a cup of heavy cream, so just to clarify that. So I'm measuring that in this liquid measuring cup, and I'm just going to ask you to take a close-up look of it because it's the marks are in the inside. If you're using the marks on the outside, you kind of have to hold the cup, or you have to squat down. If you're holding a cup, you can't get an accurate measurement. It needs to be level to the measuring line. So if you're using the side measures, you need to keep the cup on the counter on a flat surface, and then as you're measuring, check as you pour till you get to 1 cup. But the neat thing about this measuring cup is there's marks on the inside where you're not squatting down and trying to see if it's level or not. You simply look inside, and as you approach to 1 cup, you know you have an accurate measurement. So let's take a close-up as I measure off 1 cup of heavy cream. So as I'm pouring, I can just look directly down into the cup, and when the water or the milk level hits 1, I stop. And I have a 1
Easy
cup
as
measure.
pie.
Whenever you're using the technique of alternating dry ingredients then wet ingredients into a batter, you start with the dry ingredient. So you're going to use about 1/3 of, oh, you know what? Hold the production here. I forgot to add my pinch of salt. All right. I don't have a measure for pinch of salt. I kind of eyeball it. There you go. And glad I thought of that. And I just incorporate it into the flour with a whisk. Okay. Now, take 1 cup of your flour. Here I'm not worrying about, you know, an exact measurement. Set it on top of the batter. Put the paddle down and go to the lowest setting because if I put it up any faster, that flour would fly everywhere. So then as it begins to be worked into the batter, I can pull it up to the next highest setting. But I don't want to beat this too vigorously. I give it about 25 seconds maybe, until I'm really not seeing flour at all on the top of the batter. Turn it off. Pull down the stuff that's stuck up on the upper side of the bowl. Kind of that'll work in, but I don't want it there on the bowl. I want it in the batter. Now I'm going to add half of the cream. I do that with the slowest speed and just, okay, at the slowest speed I just start to pour off a small stream of the cream, of the liquid, as it works its way into the batter. I'm about halfway there now. Okay, and that's going to take a little bit. You can, you know, if you look closely, you can kind of see it floating off onto the side. So as it's working its way up, I take it up to the next speed, let it work its way in. Once again, 25, 30 seconds. I'm going to let it beat. Actually, I probably ought to add a little more. Okay, once again, using that spatula, I clean down the sides, bring it up off the paddle, and I'm going to add another 1/3 of my flour measure, setting it on top of the batter, putting the mixer down, and taking it to the lowest level, begin to incorporate the flour. As most of the flour starts to get moist, I can pick the speed up a little, give it about 30 seconds, 25 seconds. Alright, once again, clean off the sides. Put the paddle back in, put it on the lowest speed, and add the rest of the cream. Between the cream and the butter, this is an extremely rich pound cake. And then we've added 3 cups of sugar, so it's not diet friendly, that's for sure. Pick it up a little. Pull that cream off the sides of the bowl where it kind of was rising a little. Okay, I'm going to add 1 and 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla into the batter. It's been all mixed up. All my flour and cream has been beaten in, and I'm just at the last step here going to incorporate the vanilla. Once again, I start the mixer off slow so I'm not spraying vanilla out of the bowl, and then I pick it up to just work it in. Okay, that should about do it. Sometimes cake recipes caution you about overbeating, but it seems with the directions on this recipe, it really takes a beating. Alright, so I'm going to clean my paddle off so I can get all that great batter into my pan. And the next step, actually, which can be done as you're waiting for the eggs to be beaten in, but I haven't done it yet, is to spray the tube pan. So make sure you shake up this can before you start spraying, and then just kind of tilt it slightly. And I begin by spraying the tube part all the way around, making sure I get that. Then the inside edges, and then the outside of the pan. I'm just spraying it lightly, and we're good to go. Just a light glaze there. Like I said, if you don't have the spray with the flour in it, don't use the regular pan without the flour. Just don't mix those up. You really want the baking spray, no stick spray. And if you don't have that, you can wipe Crisco all around and then lightly dust with the flour, shake it out so there's no loose flour pooling in the bottom of the pan, that it's just coating the pan. But this technique just goes so quickly. It's what I do now. Alright, so we're going to get the batter in the pan. Now, if I just pour the batter into the pan, it's all going to be lumping on one side of the pan. And I don't want that. It's a very thick batter, and it doesn't flow that loosely. So I put part of it in one side, then I rotate the pan and pour some more in the other side, and just do that until all my batter is in the pan. All right. One nice thing about this pound cake is the topping gets so crisp, and so I don't worry about smoothing it, because I like that crispiness that occurs, and I think it occurs at a greater degree if you don't smooth out the top of the cake. Alright, and I like to get every little morsel of batter out into that pan, and there we go. And I'm using a larger size tube pan. This is a very full batter, and my smaller pan and my bundt pan would not work with this. Some recipes call for just banging the pan a couple of times to work any air out of the recipe. I haven't seen this cake having a problem with that, but I just do that to be on the safe side. So, as you can see, I haven't smoothed off the top of the cake. It just makes a nice, crispy, uneven rise crust on the top of the cake that way. So, it goes into a cold oven. Oh, and always move your cake, your oven rack up one. Don't cook your cakes on the bottom of the oven. More in the center is important. So, we set it at 325. Start. It's a cold oven, and it's going to cook for an hour and a half, so I'm going to put that timer on. Now, one of the things that I will advise you in baking cakes, time is always a guideline. If you're, real intense, oh, I got to take it out at an hour and a half and it'll be done, you may find it isn't. Ovens vary. It might be the humidity on a given day affects how things bake, so you need to test, and I'll show you how I test this cake for doneness before you remove it. So past experience, this cake usually takes longer than an hour and a half. But in an hour and a half, I'm going to take a look. I'm not going to look before the hour and a half. That, I think, is the mistake of a novice, to keep opening that oven. Oh, how's my cake doing? You know what? It needs an even temperature. And if you're opening the oven, you're affecting that. So keep the oven closed. I don't bake a cake with other things in the oven. Just the cake. I want the heat to be very consistent around it. So that's it. We're going to check back in an hour and a half, and I'll show you how we test for doneness. My pound cake has been in the oven for a little over a half hour, and I'm going to begin the preparation of a delightful lemon sauce that I use with the pound cake. Pound cake itself is great, but it's very plain. And by using this lemon sauce, I bring it up a notch, and it really becomes something special. My husband, who's not a fan of cakes, likes the pound cake with lemon sauce. So we're going to cut some lemons here and get the juice out of them, and we're going to make this sauce on the stovetop. Oh, we have a half cup of butter, a cup of sugar, a quarter cup of water, 1 egg beaten, and a quarter cup of lemon juice. We're going to mix that all together, and we're going to combine these ingredients, whisk constantly over a medium heat until it comes to a boil, and then we're done. It's ready to serve. So let's get this lemon juiced. All right, lots of little ways to juice a lemon. It is good to have them at room temperature. Some people roll them like this and kind of get it broken up, but I don't know that that makes much of a difference. I just have this little, I have a simple plastic, very cheap juicer. It works for me. There are all kinds of options out there for collecting juice. Now this particular lemon seems to be more rind than juice, so I may need 2 to get myself a quarter cup. As you can see, a lot of the pulp and the seeds are squashed out as well, so as I pour it into my measuring cup, just to be safe, I strain it. And yeah, see, there is a little bit of stuff there. I'm nowhere near, no, I am nowhere near a quarter cup. Like I said, that lemon seemed to be more rind than juice. Same problem with this one. whenever I have a recipe calling for lemons, I always make sure I have more than I anticipate I'll need. You just never know the quality of juice in a citrus fruit. And I don't like to use the bottled lemon juice in my baking. I always like to go with the fresh lemons. So I do think it makes a difference. And we're still nowhere near a quarter cup of lemon juice, so I'm squeezing away here. I'm going to get rid of that pulp. I still probably need another half lemon. We have a quarter cup. It took 2.5 lemons to get that, so I've had much juicier lemons in the past than these are, but as I said, that's why I always buy more than I think, you know, when the recipe would call for. Heavy saucepan, combine butter, sugar, water, beaten egg, and lemon juice. When a recipe calls for beaten egg, you don't want to whip it. You just take the fork, let the yolk break up, just mix it slightly. Alright, that's a beaten egg, so that's the condition you want it in. So, to the stove. A half cup of butter is 1 stick of butter. Okay. Make sure I get it all. I can use the spatula to get it out. Turn the heat on up to about a medium high to start melt that butter. And just add all the ingredients. The butter, the sugar, the quarter cup of water, the beaten egg. I'll use my spatula to get that all out of there. And the quarter cup of lemon juice. Over medium heat, whisking constantly. So it's going to take a little bit for that butter to melt, but I'm going to start whisking, and I'll just continue to do this until it comes to a boil. It says to use a small, heavy saucepan, so that's why I chose this size, which makes it kind of hard to whisk. Just do it a little more gently, so I'm not messing up my stovetop. This pound cake could also make a very nice base for strawberries, kind of like a pound cake strawberry shortcake kind of dessert. And so with that in mind, even though I'm serving it with the lemon sauce, and that's really the feature flavor, you'll see that when I put this on the plate with the lemon sauce, I always throw some blueberries and a strawberry with it because I just think it looks so beautiful, and the taste of these fruits are all complementary. A little time to get this lemon sauce right. I've been stirring here for about 6 minutes on a medium heat. I'm using an electric stove, and I have, you know, one low through high, which would be 10, and I have this between 5 and 6, so that's the temperature I have it at. And it's just starting to make a little steam off the top of the liquid here. If you're using a gas stove, I recommend that you use one of those diffusers that you put over the flame. Even though on the lowest level, I find when I'm cooking at my mom's house with her gas stove, I have a hard time keeping the heat down low enough when I'm doing a sauce or something like this that requires a lower even heat. Whereas with the electric stove, I can have it up into the mid-range, into the medium heat, and it's working. Alright, we'll just take a close-up look at this in a moment, and you'll see what it looks like as it's coming to a boil. It's getting a frothy appearance to it. It's coming to a high frothy boil. I'm still stirring constantly, but I cannot stir that boil down. That's what you want to take it to. Let it boil like that for 30 seconds or so. You know, don't just zip it right off. But keep your stirring, because with all this sugar in there, it might have a tendency to burn. Okay, that's certainly boiled enough. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to stir it down a little bit It is important that you be patient in this process, that you let it get to the boil, you stir constantly. Otherwise, you're just going to have a separation of the butter and just like kind of a greasy mess instead of a lovely lemon sauce. So, I'm going to let that sit. It's recommended you can just let it cool down to room temperature, serve it at room temperature, refrigerate. I'm serving this tomorrow. I'm making this a day ahead of when my company's coming. So after it cools to room temperature, I'll put it in a tight lidded container, put it in the refrigerator. Tomorrow, when I'm ready to serve my pound cake, I'll take this out a couple hours ahead of time and let it warm to room temperature. If I need to get it a little looser, I might zap it in the microwave. But actually, I've never really had to do that. It just comes together very nicely, and it makes a wonderful dressing or a wonderful topping for our cake. All right, we still have 45 minutes on that. Just under a minute, and I need to check the cake. So I wanted to show you what I used to test this pound cake. These are bamboo skewers sold for grilling food. And years ago, you're reading the recipes as check it with a toothpick. Well, the toothpick doesn't really check that well, and they're kind of delicate, whereas these bamboo skewers do a great job. So if I can't find my bamboo skewers, I will use a very thin bladed knife to pop it in and see if the cake is done. So we're 18 seconds away, so I think we have enough time here. Let's take a quick look at how the cake looks. Okay, it looks nice and brown. There's a little bit of the separation at the top of the crust. This feels firm. I'm going to go in this area that it's cracked already. Push this down, bring it out, and it's completely clean. So that means the cake is done. Another sign that the cake is done is that there's a little bit of separation in the edges. I can put this knife down with no problem. The crust of the cake pulls away from the edges of the pan. So you can see how nicely this cake rose and how it filled this pan. So you cannot make this in a small bundt pan. We're going to take the cake and we're going to put it on a rack here and let it cool for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we're going to take it out. I remove the outer ring and then let it cool down with just the tube compartment, and then when it's really cold, I take it and invert it and put it on the cake plate. So that's where we're at. Okay, we'll come back and look at how we get it out of the pan in 10 to 15 minutes. Well, the cake's been cooling for a while, and I'm ready to take it out of the pan. I use a very thin bladed knife. And even though it's separated, and I know it's separated from the side of the pan, I just want to double check that it's not sticking. You can also use a kind of spatula like that and do the same thing. But I find the knife is easier. Alright, it's actually cooled quite a bit. Normally I do it in 10 to 15 minutes after I take it out of the oven, but I got a phone call and kind of got off track. So I like this because I can simply lift it like that, set it down, and allow it to continue to cool. And the paper is, you just remove it and wash the pan. Okay, now, it's still actually a little warm, alright? And I like to let it sit until it's completely cool. So I was going to take it off the remaining section of the cake pan, but it isn't really cool enough. But I will demonstrate. I will take this angled spatula and I kind of tightly press it against the bottom of the pan and just kind of slide it along because I don't want it to stick when I turn it. Alright. And that's one of the advantages that I like about the two-piece tube pan. I can do that. Also, like that's actually a little thicker than the knife. I can also do the same thing with the knife and come in and make sure that the bottom is not sticking. So I just follow the pressing. I really have to press, otherwise I'm digging up into the cake and I don't want to do that. I just want to make sure it's separated from the bottom. Okay? Oops, see, I got a little bit of cake there. I didn't want to do that. Alright. Keep doing that. Alright, so I've pretty well separated that. And I can now, and this is the tricky part, you kind of have to hold it with your hand, lift that off. Oh, see, I did lose some of the bottom of the cake, and then turn it like this. Let it to continue to dry on the rack because it is a little moist at the bottom there and I want it to dry. Alright, so it's going to sit and dry, and then I'm going to move it to the cake plate. And then overnight, I don't wrap it with any cover overnight. What I do is I set it on the cake plate and I set it in my microwave. That way nothing gets on it, it stays, you know, clean, but it's continues to dry that hard crust that's very nice on the outside of the cake. So that's my little secret, putting it in the microwave. And then the next day, after I serve it, I cover it with saran wrap. Not saran wrap, that press and seal. But I don't do that for the first 24 hours because I like that hardening effect on the crust. It just really makes a nice touch. So, my cake is ready to put on the cake plate and get stored till tomorrow. And the lemon sauce is a beautiful, luscious color. It's cooled now enough. I'm going to put a lid on it and put it in the refrigerator, and that's ready for tomorrow, and we'll show you that. So, we'll show you the cake when we serve it tomorrow when we have some company to enjoy our wonderful pound cake. Well, if you've followed the step-by-step directions, you now have a beautiful pound cake ready to serve. In fact, this one has actually passed the test with my kitchen test crew, and they've had a couple slices already. As I said, when we finished baking it, I put it in the microwave and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours, and then as I cut it the next day, I covered it with saran wrap to keep it fresh. It has a relatively long shelf life for a cake. As lovely as this looks, it is really a plain cake. And I had the experience a number of years ago of bringing this cake to a potluck that we had at work, thinking, wow, you know, this is a wonderful cake, it'll be a big hit. And much to my chagrin, I came home with more than half the cake. Even though I knew it was a good cake, it couldn't compete with these luscious cheesecakes and rum cakes and the fancier desserts that some of my coworkers brought in. So I thought, we need a solution here. I know I have a good cake. What I need to do is dress it up for appeal. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to serve the cake, and I'm going to show you how to make it really a spectacular looking dessert. We've already prepared the lemon sauce, so that's at room temperature. If you've refrigerated it, you can bring it back to room temperature by hitting it for about 20 seconds in the microwave and stirring thoroughly. Alright, so take your slice of cake, and I think I'd like to point out, this cake hardly has any crumb creation when I cut it, which just demonstrates the fine quality of the texture of the cake. Put a wedge of cake on your plate, take the lemon sauce, okay, and I always drizzle it across the back edge of the slice. Just enough, and here, this is my second spoonful here, just enough to begin it sliding down both the back and the top of the wedge. Don't want to overdo it, alright? It's tasty and it has a lot of sweetness to it, a lot of butter to it. You don't want to overdo it and get the cake soggy. Alright, I've carefully washed the blueberries. Any little pieces of stem have been removed, and then I dry them on a paper towel because I don't want to bring water to my cake. So my nice clean blueberries I sprinkle along the edge of the cake like so. Then carefully washed and ripened strawberry I slice. Actually, I'm going to use the other knife, it's a little easier to manage. I just take some slices through without cutting the stem cap off. I do want the green on my strawberry, so I try to just take some slender slices through the strawberry because I'm then going to fan it by spreading the slices out and just tucking it on the side of the cake. Okay, so here we have quite a sweet looking dessert. Hope you enjoyed making this pound cake and that you've enjoyed this step-by-step video from Aunt Janet's Kitchen. Thanks a lot.